Chapter 1: The Day Nothing Felt Real. What would you do if one day the world lost its emotional weight? Have you ever had a moment where everything felt distant, like you were watching your life from the outside? Welcome back to Mindscape Audiobooks, where every story reveals something deeper about the human mind. Tonight, we begin with a quiet disturbance. Not loud, not dramatic, but something far more unsettling. The absence of feeling. Daniel didn't notice it immediately. That's the strange thing about losing something internal. You don't always recognize the exact moment it disappears. It was a Tuesday morning. Ordinary in every possible way. The kind of morning that blends into thousands of others. The alarm rang at 6:30 a.m. Daniel reached over, turned it off, and sat up in bed. There was no frustration. No reluctance. Just movement. Mechanical. Automatic. He walked into the kitchen. Poured coffee. Watched the steam rise slowly into the air. Normally, this was his favorite moment of the day. The warmth. The smell. The quiet anticipation of beginning something new. But today, nothing. He lifted the cup. Took a sip. It tasted the same. But it didn't feel the same. No comfort. No satisfaction. Just information. Hot. Bitter. Drinkable. That's how his mind registered it. Not as an experience, but as data. At first, Daniel ignored it. After all, people have off days. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he didn't sleep well. He got dressed. Checked his phone. Responded to messages. Everything normal. Except, everything felt distant. Not physically, but internally. On his way to work, something unusual happened. A car in front of him suddenly stopped. Daniel reacted quickly. Pressed the brakes. The tires screeched. For a brief second, the car behind him nearly crashed into his bumper. The kind of moment that usually triggers a surge of adrenaline. Heart racing. Hands shaking. A spike of fear. But Daniel felt nothing. He noticed it instantly. Not panic, but the absence of panic. He placed his hand on his chest. His heartbeat was steady. Too steady. And that's when the first question appeared in his mind. Why am I not afraid? Most people would brush it off. But Daniel didn't. Because deep down, he knew something wasn't right. At work, things became even clearer. His colleague, Marcus, approached him. "Hey man, you look off. Everything okay?" Daniel paused. "I'm fine," he said. And logically, that was true. There was no pain. No illness. But something was missing. And he couldn't name it. Throughout the day, Daniel observed himself. Like a scientist studying a subject. He noticed how others reacted to things. Laughter in the office. Frustration during meetings. Excitement over small wins. But inside him, there was silence. Then came the call. Around 3:15 p.m. His phone rang. It was his mother. He hesitated before answering. "Hey Mom." Her voice sounded tense. "Daniel. I heard about the accident." He blinked. "What accident?" There was a pause. "The one from Sunday. The hospital called me. Are you okay?" And then he remembered. 2 days earlier, Daniel had been in a car crash. A serious one. The kind that could have killed him. He remembered the impact. The sound of metal collapsing. Glass shattering. The sudden stop. But what he didn't remember was fear. Or pain. Or relief afterward. "I'm okay," he said calmly. Too calmly. His mother sounded confused. "Are you sure? You don't sound like yourself." Daniel didn't know how to respond. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure who himself even was anymore. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. The city outside was alive. Cars moving. People talking. Lights flickering across buildings. He stared out the window, trying to feel something. Anything. But there was nothing. No peace. No sadness. No loneliness. Just existence. And then, a thought entered his mind. Slowly. Quietly. But with terrifying clarity. If I don't feel anything, does anything matter? That question didn't scare him. It should have. Chapter 2, The Brain Without Emotion. What happens when the part of your brain responsible for emotion goes silent? Question to you, listener. If you could remove fear, sadness, and anxiety from your life completely, would you actually become happier, or would you lose something essential? Daniel didn't go to the doctor because he was afraid. That would have required fear. He went because something didn't make sense. And Daniel had always trusted logic more than anything else. 3 days after the phone call with his mother, he sat in a quiet office across from a neurologist. The room was minimal. White walls. Soft lighting. A faint hum from machines behind the door. The doctor studied him carefully. "You said you don't feel anything," she asked. Daniel nodded. No anxiety. No excitement. No sadness. Nothing. She leaned forward slightly. "And this started after the accident?" "Yes." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just clinical. "Tell me," she said, "how did you feel during the crash?" Daniel thought about it. "I didn't." That answer lingered in the room. Because it wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. Over the next hour, Daniel went through a series of tests. Cognitive assessments. Memory recall. Emotional recognition exercises. At one point, the doctor showed him a series of images. A child laughing. A man crying. A couple embracing. "What do you see?" she asked. Daniel answered easily. A happy child. A distressed adult. Two people expressing affection. "Good," she said. "Now tell me, how does it make you feel?" Daniel paused. There it was again. That empty space. No reaction. The doctor wrote something down. Then she said something that would change the way Daniel understood himself forever. "There's a possibility that your emotional processing system has been affected, particularly areas like the limbic system." Daniel listened carefully. Unlike most patients, he wasn't nervous. He was curious. "The limbic system," she continued, "is responsible for how we experience emotions, fear, pleasure, attachment, motivation." She tapped the brain scan on the screen. If it's disrupted, a person can still think, but they may not feel in the same way. Daniel leaned slightly forward. "So I've lost my emotions?" "Not necessarily lost," she replied. "But disconnected." That distinction mattered. Even if Daniel didn't feel why it mattered. She explained further. "There are conditions where people struggle to identify emotions, like alexithymia, but your case is different." "How?" "You're not confused about emotions," she said. "You understand them perfectly. You just don't experience them." Daniel processed that instantly. "So I'm functioning without emotional input?" "Yes." There was no shock. No denial. Just understanding. And strangely, a quiet advantage. At first, Daniel didn't see this as a problem. He saw it as clarity. Over the next few days, he began to notice something unexpected. Life became easier. At work, decisions that once felt stressful became simple. No overthinking. No second guessing. Just logic. Pure, uninterrupted logic. When his manager asked him to lead a high-pressure project, Daniel accepted immediately. No hesitation. No doubt. When conflicts arose in meetings, Daniel remained calm. While others raised their voices, defended their ideas, or reacted emotionally, Daniel analyzed. Responded. Resolved. People started noticing. "You're different," Marcus said one afternoon. "In a good way," another colleague added. "You're like, unshakable." And in a sense, he was. Because nothing could shake him anymore. No fear of failure. No anxiety about judgment. No emotional attachment to outcomes. Just results. Within weeks, Daniel became the most efficient person in the office. His productivity increased. His decisions became. His focus, absolute. But something subtle began to change. Not in his performance, but in his choices. Without emotion, Daniel didn't weigh things the same way others did. One evening, he stayed late at work reviewing team performance. He noticed that one employee, James, had consistently underperformed. In the past, Daniel might have considered James's personal struggles, his effort, his potential. But now, those thoughts didn't carry weight. The data was clear. Low performance. Repeated errors. Reduced output. So Daniel made a decision. The next morning, he called James into his office. "You're being let go," Daniel said. His tone was neutral. Not harsh. Not kind. Just factual. James stared at him. Wait, just like that? No warning. No discussion. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "The decision is based on your performance metrics." "But, I've been going through a lot lately," James said. "My father's been sick." "I thought." "I understand," Daniel replied. And he did. Intellectually. But understanding without emotion is incomplete. "There's nothing more to discuss," Daniel added. James left the room in silence. Later that day, Marcus approached him again. "Man, that was cold." Daniel looked at him. "It was efficient." Marcus shook his head. "That's not the point." But to Daniel, it was. Because without emotion, the point changes. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, people began to feel something around Daniel. Not admiration. Not respect. Distance. They couldn't explain it. But something about him felt off. Not dangerous. Not aggressive. Just inhuman. And Daniel noticed. Not emotionally. But observationally. People spoke to him less. Laughed around him less. Connected with him less. And for the first time since the accident, a new question formed in his mind. If I can't feel, can I still connect? But connection, like meaning, requires emotion. And Daniel was beginning to understand something deeper. Something even logic couldn't replace. Emotion isn't just a reaction. It's a guide. Without it, you don't just lose pain. You lose direction. Chapter 3: When Logic Replaces Humanity. What happens when a person becomes perfectly rational but loses the ability to care? If you could make decisions without guilt, fear, or attachment, would you trust yourself more or less? By the time Daniel began to notice the distance between himself and others, it was already too late to ignore. At first, the changes were subtle. People still spoke to him. Still worked with him. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Conversations became shorter. Laughter around him became cautious. Even silence felt different. Not peaceful, but empty. Daniel didn't feel rejected. He observed rejection. And that distinction mattered. One evening, as the office slowly emptied, Marcus approached him again. But this time, there was hesitation in his steps. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "You already are," Daniel replied calmly. Marcus exhaled. "Do you even care about anything anymore?" The question lingered. Not emotionally, but intellectually. Daniel considered it carefully. "What do you mean by care?" he asked. Marcus frowned. "You know, caring. Feeling something. About people. About what happens." Daniel thought about recent events. Firing James. Ending conversations abruptly. Ignoring emotional cues. I respond to situations based on outcomes, Daniel said. Not feelings. Marcus stared at him. That's not normal. Daniel tilted his head slightly. It's efficient. There it was again. That word. Efficient. Marcus shook his head slowly. Yeah, but you're not a machine. Daniel didn't respond. Because for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure Marcus was right. That night, Daniel returned home. The apartment was quiet. As always. He sat down and began reviewing his day. Not emotionally, but analytically. Input. Output. Results. And yet, something didn't add up. His performance had improved. His clarity had increased. His stress had disappeared. So why? Was his world becoming smaller? Why were people pulling away? That question didn't disturb him. But it stayed. Persistent. Unresolved. Days later, Daniel received a message. From Mira. Can we talk? Mira. Before the accident. She had been one of the few people Daniel genuinely enjoyed being around. At least. He believed he had. They met at a quiet cafe. The kind of place filled with soft music and warm lighting. Designed to create emotion. Mira arrived first. Daniel noticed her immediately. Not because of how he felt, but because of how she looked. Tense. Careful. Watching him. He sat down across from her. You wanted to talk? She nodded slowly. There was a pause. Longer than necessary. I don't recognize you anymore, she said. Daniel waited. You're here, but you're not here, she continued. It's like talking to someone who's just empty. Daniel processed her words. Not defensively. Not emotionally. Define empty, he said. Mira blinked. Daniel. I'm serious. So am I, he replied calmly. She looked down briefly. Then back at him. Do you love me? The question was simple. But its weight was something Daniel could no longer feel. He thought about it. Carefully. Logically. Love. What was it? Attachment. Chemical response. Behavioral pattern. I don't think I feel love, he said finally. The words landed harder than he expected. Not for him. But for her. Myra's expression changed. Not dramatically. But enough. A small crack. What do you mean you don't think? She asked quietly. I understand what love is, Daniel said. I just don't experience it. Silence filled the space between them. For Mira, this wasn't a philosophical discussion. It was personal. So what am I to you? She asked. Daniel answered honestly. A person I have history with. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Mira stood up. Slowly. I don't know what happened to you, she said. But this isn't something I can be part of. Daniel nodded. Understood. No attempt to stop her. No emotional reaction. Just acceptance. She waited for something. Anything. But nothing came. And so she left. Daniel watched her walk away. He noticed. The way her shoulders tightened. The pace of her steps. The absence of a goodbye. But he didn't feel loss. Only observation. And yet, something lingered. Not emotion. But a question. Why did that matter to her so much? Back at work, Daniel's reputation continued to grow. Efficient. Precise. Unemotional. But now, a new word began to circulate quietly. Cold. At first, it was just whispers. He's good, but something's off. He doesn't care about anyone. It's like he's not even human. Daniel heard these things. Not directly. But indirectly. And again. He didn't feel hurt. But he noticed a pattern. The more logical he became, the less human he appeared. And that created a problem logic alone couldn't solve. Because humans don't connect through logic. They connect through emotion. One afternoon, a situation forced Daniel into unfamiliar territory. A team conflict escalated. Two employees, Sarah and Kevin, were arguing intensely. Voices raised. Tension high. Daniel stepped in. "State the issue," he said calmly. They both spoke at once. Emotionally. Rapidly. Daniel listened. Filtered the information. Removed emotional noise. "Kevin, your data is incorrect," he said. "Sarah's approach is more efficient. We will proceed with her plan." Problem solved. Or so he thought. Kevin stared at him. "That's it?" "Yes." No discussion. No acknowledgement. Kevin asked. "There is no need," Daniel replied. "The correct solution has been identified." Kevin shook his head. "That's not how this works." Daniel paused. "But, wasn't it? Wasn't the goal to find the best outcome? Why did how people felt about it matter?" That night, Daniel sat alone again. The city hadn't changed. But his understanding of it had. He began to see something clearly. Emotion isn't inefficient. It's invisible. It shapes decisions in ways logic cannot measure. It builds trust. Creates meaning. Defines connection. And without it, Daniel wasn't just different. He was disconnected from something fundamental. Not just from others, but from himself. For the first time since the accident, a realization formed. Not emotional, but undeniable. If I continue like this, I may lose more than just feelings. But the question remained. Can something lost so completely ever return? Daniel once believed emotions were obstacles. Something irrational. Something inefficient. And after the accident, when those emotions disappeared, part of him thought he had evolved beyond ordinary people. No fear. No anxiety. No heartbreak. Just clarity. Pure logic. At first, it felt like freedom. But slowly, Daniel began to understand something terrifying. A life without emotion is not peace. It is emptiness. He remembered the way Marcus looked at him in the office. Not angry. Concerned. As if he were watching someone slowly disappear. He remembered Mira standing from the cafe table. Waiting for him to stop her. Waiting for some sign that the men she once knew still existed beneath the silence. But nothing came. Not because Daniel wanted to hurt her, but because he no longer understood why emotion mattered. And that realization haunted him more than fear ever could. For months, Daniel lived like a machine pretending to be human. He could analyze people, predict behavior, understand reactions intellectually. But he could not connect. Because connection is not built through intelligence alone. It is built through feeling. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel walked through the city alone. Rain fell softly across empty streets. Neon lights reflected against the pavement. People hurried past him carrying umbrellas, laughing, arguing, holding hands. Feeling. And for the first time since the accident, Daniel envied them. Not their success. Not their happiness. Their humanity. He realized then that emotions were never weaknesses. They were anchors. Fear protects us. Sadness teaches us. Love gives meaning to sacrifice. Even pain has purpose. Without emotion, life becomes directionless. A series of actions without meaning. Achievements without fulfillment. Relationships without connection. Existence without life. Daniel eventually returned to therapy. Not because someone forced him to, but because somewhere deep inside the silence, a small part of him still wanted to feel again. And recovery did not happen dramatically. There was no cinematic breakthrough. No sudden flood of emotion. It began with tiny moments. A memory from childhood that lingered slightly longer than usual. A song that created an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. A faint warmth when someone smiled at him sincerely. Small things. Fragile things. Human things. And one evening, while watching old videos of himself and Mira together, Daniel noticed something unexpected. His eyes began to water. At first, he didn't understand. He touched his face slowly. Confused. Then he realized. He was crying. Not heavily. Not uncontrollably. But enough. Enough to remind him that somewhere beneath the emptiness, he was still human. That night, Daniel sat quietly in his apartment watching the city lights again. The same lights he once described as meaningless. But now, they felt different. Not because the city had changed, but because he finally understood something important. Meaning does not come from the world itself. It comes from what we feel about it. And maybe that is the greatest truth about being human. We are not defined by logic alone. Not by intelligence. Not by efficiency. But by our ability to feel deeply in a world that often teaches us not to. So if you have ever felt too emotional, too sensitive, too affected by life, remember this. Your emotions are not proof that you are weak. They are proof that you are alive. Thank you for listening to Mindscape audiobooks. And until next time, keep exploring the hidden depths of the human mind.